Thanks for coming to this talk. I know it just says, just invited speaker, which, I think maybe there's like that latent thing. We're just hanging out in for lunch and see if this next guy's any good. If you leave, that's okay. Like I realize we just sort of landed this topic on you, and you're like, CI/CD, I don't want any piece of that. So cool. But if you are interested in CI/CD, we're going to be talking about where security can fit in that. And I hope to give you, through this talk, like a playbook. Pieces of it you may already be doing. Some pieces you may be immature at, but maybe have some stubs for it. A lot of it's are opinions things that I've formed over the years and that I've found useful. But it's limited to, I try to like frame it in ways that I think are helpful for any language, any stack that you're doing. Yeah?
Will there be jokes?
So at work, I have this really funny thing. It's like, one of my coworkers, Cooper, she does a lot of the events for this, and she's like, James tells the best dad jokes. And I'm like, Cooper, you mean jokes? Like, why do you have to put the disclaimer on it? Is it just because I'm a dad? They're still just funny. Like, just leave that dad part out of there. So anyways, we'll try to have some jokes and see if there's something that resonates. It's funny. I was actually hoping that little one was gonna be funny, so that's where you're at. But that's the kind of stuff I get at work a lot. It's always the dad jokes, and like people finger quote, and they're like, and I had this other coworker. She's like, I'll laugh when they're actually funny, and I'm like, I was like, that hurts. So, anyways, I work at Signal Sciences, and I help organize DevOps Days Austin. And I was thinking about this earlier, like I helped, along with Josh, like we helped start LastCon, and a lot of the core team that still does it even to this day, like, 2010? And so we've been going for so many years, and it's been really great to see this conference kind of become the heart and soul of security in Austin and Texas, and then like, we were just discussing like the great lineup of speakers, the great amount of attendees here that are having like great conversations, the always vexing badge game. So it's fun. It's like a real great cultural experience, and really glad to be here with y'all today. I also have some courses on lynda.com, or now rebranded LinkedIn Learning, on DevOps and security with my good friend Ernest, who's also here. And you can check those out if you have a corporate subscription to that. Hopefully those could be helpful for you. And I blog at the Agile Admin and Signal Sciences. So I specialize in this. This is my pastime, right? It's like, just go there and tweet some things and take a picture and tell people at work, like, I'm very busy, very busy. This is recorded, right? That's unfortunate. Okay, well, if you want to get the slides, I actually didn't set up my autoresponder for this, but if you email me the slides, I'll forward them to you. But I can also put them on Twitter on my link, or on my Twitter handle here in a minute. But I've already uploaded them. But I want to start off with the premise here, and to think about where we're at and where we sit in the industry, where security is dealing with DevOps right now. And this is sort of the questions that I started thinking about, that got me thinking about this topic, and how we can do something to make it better. So first question, can security as an industry rise to the demands of DevOps? The next question, is the DevOps culture able to handle security and all of our baggage that we bring to the table? And ultimately, are we going to destroy, we as security people, going to destroy the DevOps culture? And we should really think about that and take those to heart. And I think that we need to come to the premise that security is in crisis. And I think a lot of people have realized this. I know it's been said here at LastCon. I really think back to whenever we did AppSec USA here in Austin, and we brought some of for AppSec at the time, we were already talking DevOps in a event and venue and place that other places hadn't brought to the table. And so like Austin as a city, we said, hey, we're gonna have some DevOps content. And even Gene Kim, he references talks given at that event in 2012 as like some of the most important talks on security and DevOps that he's ever seen. And so I think that really speaks well to us. So I think for this crowd, this is a good question for us to rationalize and think through and understand. And so if you look around at like RSA or DEF CON or wherever, it's like everything looks good-ish, right? The vendor halls are full, things are abuzz, things are happening. But Steve Belovin in his book, Thinking Security, recently released this quote, and he said, in the opening chapter, he says, companies are spending a great deal on security, but we read of massive computer-related attacks. Clearly something is wrong. The root of the problem is twofold. We're protecting the wrong things, and we're hurting productivity in the process. And that's a real damning statement for the security industry. I mean, this is a security insider. He wrote the book on firewalls in the late 90s. He's writing to us and saying, you haven't even fixed the problems you were set out to do, and you've jacked it all up and slowed everything down. And that's not great. Here's another quote for you. I've seeded a few more throughout the deck. So security by risk assessment introduces a dangerous fallacy that structured inadequacy is almost as good as adequacy, and that underfunded security efforts plus risk management are about as good as properly funded security work. I think that's important. We forgot the way to be engineers, and we adapted actuarial science to do our job instead. And there's this book, Agile Application Security, that came out last year that said many security teams work with a worldview where their goal is to inhibit change as much as possible. Does anybody have a friend that sounds like? Right? Okay. And I've experienced this personally. I've had developers come up to me and tell me, oh, use security, you just prefer a system that's powered off and unplugged. Like I'm an idiot, like that. It's like, I'm pretty sure I'll stop collecting paychecks if we do that, right? And then, security people, have you ever had a friend say, like, those stupid developers? You ever heard people say that? So maybe that's even come out of your own mouth too, right? But that creates that fosters a silo mentality. It sort of separates the groups, and it's been one of the problems that we've seen. And the premise here is security must change or die. And Rich Mogul believes this. He says something to this extent about RSA at the Expo Hall floors is 2017. He says in 5 years, a large percentage is going to be completely different. We'll see. I hope so. And along the path of all this going on, seen the DevOps movement and everything happen, but the world has substantially changed. Whoops. The OSI model has gotten a lot easier for us, which I am happy about, because I always forget the which, the where. So this one is, right, this is a win. And we have this thing called serverless, which I won't read that whole thing, but it's I think it's a helpful thing to look at. But here's the visual for serverless, because we're post-lunch. But everyone's moving to off of hardware, off of VMs, and over to just paying for the little bits that really matter, that do the things that I care about. And so with kind of the architectural shifts that we're seeing take place, and as people are in any part of that spectrum there, but they're moving further and further over. But having this read-only containers in serverless, this shifting the security story so where it's almost 100% about application security, and guess what? DevSecOps to the rescue, right? Okay, we'll see. But that kind of begs the question, what is DevSecOps? So, whoops, okay, get ahead. I don't have my normal clicker, sorry guys. So what is DevSecOps really? I think that we should ask fake Jack Handy or DevSecOps deep thoughts here. Maybe in order, sorry, I gotta do this right, okay. Maybe in order to understand DevSecOps, we have to look at the word itself. Basically, it's made up of 3 separate words. De, vseco, and ps. What do these words mean? It's a mystery, and that's why so is DevSecOps. Thank you. I need those little things. That helps. Okay. Whenever someone asks me to define DevSecOps, I usually think for a minute, and then I spin around and pin the guy's arm behind his back. Now who's asking the questions? So I ripped this off of a ripoff, which is great. So it's great that you've got a few laughs here. So the original DevOps Deep Thoughts was brought to us by Josh Zimmerman, the Jabberwocky on Twitter. And it was a parody of Deep Thoughts, of course, by Jack Handy. But there is an original gem that is great. And I think it still serves us well even to this day. No matter what we do, many people don't realize that playing dead can help not only with bears, but also at important business meetings. And we look at things around that's going on. It says high-performing teams are doing security, and we see proof of that in things like the State of DevOps report. And I like to say that I think DevSecOps is a cultural movement that furthers the movements of Agile and DevOps into security as a whole. In fact, it puts security right in the middle. And Patrick Dubois, the guy who coined the term DevOps originally, along with Andrew Schaefer, he says that culture is the most important aspect to DevOps succeeding in the enterprise, and I don't think we'll find anything different whenever we kind of go down the DevSecOps route as well. When we started DevOps, we started thinking, well, we have 10 developers and one operations person. We have this natural silo created, and there's the wall of confusion. There's other artwork. There's the ops girl with it's like worked fine in dev, but it's ops problems now. With a house on fire, and those are the kind of the memes that started coming out in the DevOps culture at the time. But then we started to see, well, how many security people do we have? Like for every 100 developers, we may have 10 operations, and then we have one security person. And there's this inequity in labor distribution. And so we have a problem, and it's a problem that has to actually be bridged, not just by hiring more people, because we can't do that. Ops realized that when they went through the DevOps transformation, has been undergoing that. And so security has the same one. And so I would like to talk just a second more about culture, and then we'll kind of get into pipeline things. But I always tell people in my family we have a moon culture, and it's like not some like lunar religion or something like that, but it's that we get really excited about seeing the moon, and it's because I have a little daughter, and she's really interested in it, and her room faces the right direction. So when there's a full moon, we can see out her windows pretty well, and I put her to bed, and even when she was very young, it's like we'd go out there and stare at the moon. Sometimes if it's really full, like a harvest moon or something, like I'll holler outside and we'll go look at it. And she got really excited, and then we started telling stories like build a rocket ship to the moon, or like pretend that. And I always tell her stuff like, well, because I'm like, it'll be a while before this tourism gets to a level where I'll be able to afford this. I said, but whenever you get a chance and you get to go to the moon, I don't care how old I am, you just grab Daddy and you put him on that rocket ship with you. And she's like, oh yeah, Daddy, I will, all right? So I've already got that locked in there. But we started becoming a cultural thing, and like the moon became just a common thing, became really important to us. And we started, I installed, on my phone, I installed apps to like tell me when the moon cycles are going to be, so I could sound real smart to her and tell her like, oh, it's a waning crescent tonight, or whatever, right? And the illumination and whatever patterns it, and it all kind of came to a point where I realized that like something in me had changed. When I was driving home from the airport, and like my flight was a little bit late, so I wasn't going to be home to like make it for bedtime. But I call my wife and I'm like, you gotta show Lydia the moon, because like it is like bright and it looks really great. And she's like, I already put her to bed, kind of thing. But I had felt like I was so excited that I was like, I'm not gonna be there, but you gotta do this, And as I was driving home on 1:30, so and what happened there? Like I had a new mutual understanding. We had created a shared language, even at a young age. We had shared views. I'd installed collaborative tooling on my phone, but there had been a shift in my thinking and my desire. I feel like security has a similar pattern, and you look over like at like Rich Smith for some of the stuff he's done at Etsy and other places. He's one of the authors of that Agile application security book. He says, a security team who embraces openness about what it does and why spreads understanding. And I think that's the kind of stuff that we need to seek to do. I have a whole other talk that I do that's on the emerging patterns. So this is a talk that I'm doing on like emerging patterns mixed in with like actual practical stuff for CI/CD. But I have one that just sort of looks at all about the old path and new path type ways. So if you want to link that up, you can hit me an email, and my email's again at the end of the presentation. I'll send it over to you as well. But let's look at some pragmatic stuff, because I know like that's why we go to conferences a lot of times, is to actually learn something that's helpful for us. So let's look at a security tool chain for CI/CD. And so if you were to break the tool chain up into like 5 key phases, these are the ones we're going to look at. We're going to look at develop, inherit, build, deploy, and operate. So, and a lot of this came from, as an idea from Shannon Leach. She gave a presentation here in Austin, what was that, a year and a half, 2 years ago, at DevOps Days. And I liked her pipeline and the questions and the way that she was providing feedback to the different stages. And doing a lot of ops works and pipeline stuff in my career, I thought, well, this is like something that could be helpful for people to think about how do we add in these phases. So and you guys saw how Shannon does a lot of inspirational type stuff as we saw this morning. So this is a pure shout out to her on that. Okay, let's look at the develop phase. So this is the design and development of an application and its features. So this includes all the development practice like version control, sprint planning, unit testing. What are some security activities that we can do at this phase? We can do things like threat modeling. That's one option. We can do peer review, static code analysis. We can do like security stories. Also think about what kind of authentication you have for pushing into the pipeline. I think that's important. Let's break down a couple of these. Let's look at threat modeling. So there's a book on threat modeling, and who in here is pretty familiar with threat modeling? Pretty good. Yep. Okay. Sometimes you go to like ops conferences and like there are people like threat modeling, never really heard of it, or maybe had a bad experience with it. There's one resource at the very bottom that I'll recommend to you that I've been seeing more traction and people are being able to use to help build out like a more full threat model, but doing it in ways that fit inside of an agile sprint. So that's one of the big problems with threat modeling is that it's a larger exercise that doesn't really fit in like the 2-week sprint patterns. And so Mozilla Rapid Risk Assessment, it's built to be sort of a tabletop exercise that runs start to finish in 30 minutes. You can flesh out some key portions like around the data that you're dealing with, the kind of changes that you're making. And over time, you sort of flesh out like a real threat model. And I find that to be really cool. Other stuff you can do, development standards. So this is like putting in pre-commit hooks for security. At Signal Sciences for our pipeline, we have a lot of like linting checks and code quality checks. We also have standards about what sort of stuff we're using. We're a Go shop, so I know that doesn't really apply to most people. So, but if you have questions for that, I can hit you up. I have some code examples next. But I also really believe in like the single mainline branch, and I know that can be a religious war, and that war has raged on for many years. So I may not convince you, but if you need one more argument for it, I'm in that camp. But what are some things you can do? So these are pragmatic things you can put inside your pipeline that really don't cost a lot to do as far as like no political capital, no really resource constraints. So one idea is, or two of them that I really like are Get Secrets and Get Hound. So they prevents you, the Get Secrets helps you, both of them stop you from committing sensitive data or passwords or any configuration that you don't want to accidentally leak into your pipeline. And some of the other things that you might think about on the other side are like linting tools, like Go Meta Linter is a wrapper for it. There's several options, and depending on what language you're using, there's a plethora of these like linting tools. And sometimes you don't even think about like linting the stuff that you use for automations, like even like chef cookbooks. You can lint those. Almost everything has some sort of linter in it nowadays. And when we look at how security bugs are generated and where they come from, like, or any bugs in general, it's like small code quality stuff over time, like stuff that's not commented properly, or the way you're treating your variables or naming schemas or whatever. By doing this, it helps make your code so that everybody can use it in a way, and that fits like Go format is or some people call it. I hear the insiders in Go call it FUMPT. So I don't know, whatever. Like if that's your thing, you can call it that. But what I really like about it is that it takes whatever code you write and it standardizes it to a way that is, I can look at another person's code and it looks very similar to my code and it's easy to read. There's no guessing. Where I come from Ruby, where we can all write Ruby programs that do the same thing and they all look very, very radically different. So. Okay, what are some other things? So important to know, any code standard stuff you have, like it should be run on your laptops, but it also has to be run downstream by your build system and make sure that it's verified there. Okay, static code analysis. Room is familiar with static code analysis. Yep, like this is the crew. And I guess I was a little naive a little bit, but I assembled what I thought was a good list. of static code analysis, and I put it on Twitter to get some insight, and I like started a war at some point. You know, it's like one of the most interesting things I've posted, which I thought was going to be one of the most boring. I was just like, anything else that I should add? And so I had that previous list, and then I put this framework up there, just like, hey, here's some tools, and people are like, it'll never work, and the others are like, it has to, and security. It was just funny that this really took it. So, oh yeah, I actually have a screenshot of that. I had so many hot takes that it was great, and yeah, 43 likes and a bunch of comments and stuff over what should be a boring topic. So if we know of any area of the industry that needs to be changed, I think this is definitely one of them. Okay, unit testing for security. This is the currency of developers. We often will kind of do security testing in like off cycle, or we do it at another place, but we don't stick it where the developers actually live. But when you think about how developers talk to each other and deal with each other, what do they do it in? They do it in unit tests. They do it in some sort of framework that allows them to, and I'm not just talking like unit testing, like, yeah, sure, like BDD, TDD, whatever it is, whatever framework you're using, but writing tests to express what they desire, and you do the same thing with security. So, try not to dive too deep in like the language specific stuff, but these are the type of questions at this stage that you should ask. Are the developers testing for security locally before it gets into my CI system with like the pre-commit hooks and stuff? Are we following good hygiene coding practices? Does that become standard for our team? Are we developing as a team in trunk with very few branches? Those are what you should be looking for. Okay, step 2, inheritance. So this is often the most overlooked phase, and some people don't even treat it as a phase, and they'll just lump it in with develop. But because it's the most invisible to everybody, it's the software dependencies that get bundled in and inherited into our own code and then moved along. So this is actually our real lines of code, and you can look at presentations from like SNCC or Sonatype or any of those folks, and they can show you if you write like 200 lines of code, how much is that really inside, once the application is up and running. Once you get all the frameworks and the libraries, it doesn't just blow it into like 5,000 lines of code as you might think. It's like 500,000 lines of code. And so this is what we've actually put into our software. This is our software supply chain. Things you can do here, simple things are like starting to publish out like a bill of materials, like what are the software that I've baked in. If you can do several levels deep of that, that's also great. Using some of those tools I just mentioned are helpful. And remember, we should also think of like OS level stuff too, right? I mean, we're not that far removed from like shell shock and heartbleed, but those got us. And so here's some ideas for some language tooling you can look at. Bundle audit, of course, if you're Ruby. OSAP, the dependency checker, which is good spelling there. It's mostly for Java, but there's some other development there. I haven't looked at it on the other languages much. There's NSP and retire.js as well. And of course there's paid options like Sonatype, Black Duck, JFrog. Okay, and then remember like containers. That's a whole nother ball of wax, and sometimes we think, well, I just got it in my containers, but there's startups on this like Aqua and Twistlock, but open source products like Docker Bench or Claire. So take a look at that as well. So. Okay, what have I bundled into my app that's making me vulnerable? That's a question to ask. And am I publishing a bill of materials into my application? So those are two sort of simple-ish things. Like they're not exactly free and easy to do like the previous step, but hopefully they're kind of guidance on that. Okay, the next step is your build step. And this is the phase where your CI build system runs all the build steps and does acceptance testing, and all the previous testing and tooling gets verified here. So before you're just sort of asking developers to do it, you're sort of asserting that they are, but this is where you actually trust it, you sign off on it, and there's an artifact that comes out the other side of this that's your build. So security considerations here become more numerous and become somewhat more interesting. You can do outside-in security testing, you do infrastructure as code testing, dynamic application security testing can happen here. There's some gotchas with that we'll talk about here in a second. No one's doing it perfectly yet on the compliance on every build yet, but there is that conversation starting. Shannon mentioned the Dear Auditor project earlier, but we're seeing more compliance interest getting merged into the pipeline, and I think that's very instructive and important for us to look at. With a lot of this stuff, you can't forget like simple things like the configuration for my cloud provider or whatever it is that I need to test, like everything needs to be in scope for your build phase, not just your app or the containers that you're kind of building. Okay, so let's talk like dynamic application security scanners. So a lot of these require tuning, and they're sometimes difficult to put in pipelines. I mean, you can turn on any scanner, walk away, come back a day later, it's still running, or it's crashed, or some of those problems. They try to like enumerate everything on the site. Of course, I think this crowd's probably very familiar with that, and you can list all those there to take a look at. Nikto, Arachne, Zap, other stuff like SSLIs and Nmap or whatever. There's paid options as well, which I imagine most of us are familiar with, like Qualys or AppScan, Burp Suite. But from the application security book, and this is something that we need to think about, is the goal is to come up with a set of automated tests that's sort of our baseline, and it's probing and checking security configurations and runtime system behavior for security features that will execute every time the system is built and every time the system is deployed. So I work on a project called Gauntlet, which worked on with several people here in the community. We've talked about it at different events around here. But it is a testing framework that's built on top of Cucumber and kind of taking that idea of like, let's do behavior-driven development, but let's do it with security in mind. And it takes these security tools, it doesn't install them, but it takes them and makes them composed in a way that they're able to be put inside of a CI/CD pipeline. And those tests are able to be enumerated and run, and then you're able to get the results that you actually need. So you can find out more about it at gauntlet.org, but we can just take a quick look at this list here. So when you walk through this Gauntlet example, it's using plain English to describe what's going on. We're looking for cross-site scripting using Arachne against a URL of our choosing. Then we have a scenario with some setup steps, and we have a given step. So it's got this language of given, when, then, which is like Gherkin framework to say how I expect my test to flow. So given a tool is installed and I have the following profile, when I launch this attack with Arachne, it's a very specific attack of just using the XSS cross-site scripting checks there. Then the output should contain 0 issues. Now, what are some benefits of something like this? One of the benefits is that you can take the domain knowledge of the one, of my 110.1, and distill it into a simple file, an attack file that other people are able to read. And it's able to automate part of the system and the learning that the security organization has. The other part is, like, if you're a developer and you pick this up, do you imagine that you'd be able to read this and understand what's going on? Yeah. Right? It's like, I may not know what the line 3 up from the bottom is because I have no idea what we're doing with spiders inside of my system, but everything else, like, I got it, right? And I understand this last bit and like 0 issues detected. That speaks my language as a developer. And let's say you're trying to, harmonize like some of the weird flags in like, I don't know, like Nikto or whatever. And you can add comments to this and just say, yeah, here, this is what's normal. But it's a plain text way for combining these folks. And when we started Gauntlet, like, that was our hope. Like, get developers, operations, security, all been able to, collaborate together inside of your CI/CD pipeline at some point and apply this level of testing. My friend Aaron Reinhardt, who's over at United Healthcare, he cornered me, not this RSA, but the last RSA. It's like, hey, we love it. And we used Gauntlet as a way to bootstrap DevOps and DevSecOps really in general across our entire organization. And that's how we got a bunch of charter for stuff. So we started like writing some simple tests for like checking for SQL injection, cross-site scripting, command execution, misconfigured ports, just anything they could think of. They just started generating like a little suite. And they started injecting that into all the different pipelines that exist in the value streams inside of their company. And then the people got interested and they started seeing security results alongside of their other testing results. And he said that really got them more buy-in. They got everybody interested in like doing more with security. And so a very like simple type tool had a big impact for them. And I said, where's my cut, bro? And but I do have a course on Gauntlet specifically that's available in the LinkedIn Learning Library, and so if you want to check that out, there's a whole of that. And if you want to hit me up, I can get you a free trial to that or some other assets if that would be helpful. Okay, let's talk about infrastructure and compliance. There's things like Test Kitchen and Server Spec, which you can run. Chef has a product InSpec that is trying to tackle this whole compliance testing for your pipeline. And I think I mentioned cloud providers infrastructure too. Let's keep going, so we'll kind of keep trucking through here. Questions to ask here. Am I testing for security low-hanging fruit? Am I arming my pipeline with attack tools so that they're able to exercise the application? And have I validated the previous 2 phases of testing in a secure build environment? So, okay, how are we doing? I know the lunch is kind of setting in. Is this good? We keep going? Okay. More jokes. I know. I'm like, man, I really didn't put as many jokes in this one. So yeah. Next time, guys, I'll work better on the jokes. Okay, so deploy. Everybody loves some pipeline jokes, right? I don't know. Yeah, it's like, it's kind of a dry subject. And you're like, that's why they didn't print it on the little program. He suckered us into talking about work stuff. So, okay. Well, the phase where software moves from testing and our customer is able to operate it for the very first time. So that's a good deploy definition. So here, there's a lot of compliance stuff that's going to apply here. Doing secrets management is important. Authorization logging. This is where the code, infrastructure as code actually gets executed. So that those bits are important. And for me, something that was very helpful. When I started at Signal Sciences, we were probably like 3 months in, and I was on this call. And the CTO said, hey, yeah, in 2 weeks we're all going to fly out to headquarters. And he said, James is going to show us the deployment pipeline that we're building. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I must have been doing that Jack Handy thing where I was like pretending to be dead in a meeting, and I just got like something assigned to me or something because I had no clue what he was talking about. And so I looked on my bookshelf. I was like, Jez Humble has a book. And so I started reading that book furiously. And then I started furiously, a lot of them come from Etsy. So I started reading like, okay, how did Etsy do it? What's the ways? I'd built some other stuff before, but not quite like the button that you're supposed to push. And it kind of worked okay, but it became this thing that we call Deployer, and Deployer is a Go app that takes all of our code and pushes it. And right now we're at to like where we do 10, 15 deploys a day. We've done 10, I guess this number is probably like 12,000 deploys in the last 3 or 4 years now. So, and then we changed our logging thing, so I don't have anything past that, but because the company's 4 years old. But the thing that really struck me that's important about deployment and how we do it versus how other people think about it is continuous delivery it's really about how little can you deploy at a single point in time. And we like to think about this, and Gene Kim talks about this as well, but optimizing for the total cycle time. So the amount of time it takes from whenever you commit code into version control and then it's actually running and customers are using it. And what is that time? A lot of people will focus just on the specific piece for their build, right? How long does Jenkins take to like do all the bits and all the testing? But we try to think about the whole piece, and that's your total flow, and that's your cycle time. And try to keep that you want to keep it in like the 5 to 10 minute range. I know some people will say some people will say that's too slow. A lot of people are saying like that's smoking crack. That's way too fast. I don't know. I do think that having that feedback loop where someone can deploy code, you're able to verify and test it, and you're able to see what's actually happening with it on the wire within a short window of time, roughly 5 minutes. That's a very visceral thing that helps impact developers, operations, and security, and it's something that provides that feedback. But you might say, what about compliance? Compliance teaches us that we need to have separation of duties, and like you just can't do this kind of stuff. From the Agile Application Security book, if you're in that boat, there's some really great chapters on compliance and dealing with that. So in that book it says deploys can be treated as standard or routine changes that have been pre-approved by management and that don't require heavyweight like change control meetings or change review meetings or or the cabs or whatever. And we like to think of change controls in this whole like the launching the nuke situation, right? Like we're deploying software, which is probably the most frictionless thing in the world to actually make changes, right? It's not like we're pouring a road or like launching a bomb, right? But we have like ideas that like, but no one should ever do that like alone, right? Certainly not people who you pay six figures to and have had many years of experience doing this. They should never do that alone. They should not be trusted to do that. So we want to get that out of our thinking, because that's not a helpful thing to deal with. And so what we would rather do is have testing that makes it so it's safe. You definitely need to still do code reviews. But there's some components that we need to keep the speed up, and if security is just the culture where we're putting the no stamp on everything, like people are just going to go straight around us. Like that's already been proven. We've seen it play out over the years. So you got to figure out a way to say yes, but that also means bringing the auditors and compliance people along for the journey, and not just leaving them hanging with kind of compliance standards that are a decade dated, right? Because if you look at any of those standards, none of them are really bad. I mean, sure, maybe they're like a little over specific in places, but they're all most of them are focused on waterfall delivery practices, or SDLC. Well, that's not great. And so if you remove those bits, like you're left with kind of a meaningful amount of things. So helping bring them into your journey, show them how you're doing things, I think that's helpful. There's a DevOps Audit Defense Toolkit, is a white paper with some scenarios in that that I think is pretty helpful. And Shannon mentioned that this morning as well, but we have the Dear Auditor project. And inside of this, we have this kind of like, fanciful written love letter here. And the team that put this together, though, come from Capital One, come from ZBA Labs, from Columbia Sportswear, but it was folks that are doing security and DevOps, compliance and audit, and we just sort of sat around a room for 2 whole days, and we argued with each other, and then we were like, well, we should just be nice, and so we actually wrote a love letter type scenario to auditors and said, we want to bring auditors along for the journey. We don't want to just do this by ourselves, and we're sorry that we kind of were. And then inside of it, there's some links that are kind of buried, and we need some help, and we are accepting pull requests, of course, but we have a DevOps controls matrix, and so we make some promises about here's the actions that DevOps shops are going to do, and here's the security controls that they map to, and here's some of the evidence that we produce because of that. And we try to make sure, like, it was a really great time of learning for me specifically, because we had some auditors there. They were like, that's just never going to work, and then we kind of said, well, but by this we mean by this, and they said, oh, well, that could work, and we started to find like some harmony and some crossover there. And I was talking with one of the other guys on this project, Topo Paul, but we were trying to figure out like what's our next step for this. So if you have ideas for how to get this in front of auditors, or you want to test it out, or you want to take a look at the controls matrix and help add in some comments, like we would love that, and we'd be very interested in kind of joining together forces on that. So if you get a chance, dearauditor.org, and it's a GitHub repo. So thanks. Okay, let's talk about other deployment stuff. So checking your cloud config, you can use things like evident.io or ThreatStack or Alien Vault. If you're dealing with a cloud provider, you can use AWS CloudTrail, or there's the new AWS config thing. That's pretty great. All right, so questions to ask at the deploy stage. What secrets are needed to move my application into production? Am I doing compliance testing on every deploy? And do I have a repeatable mechanism to test or push it into production? And the last phase here is operate. And so this is the stage that a lot of people leave out of a pipeline as well, because once it's deployed, it's good. But we need the telemetry from actual operations. And when we look back at the DevOps movement when it first started, and it was mostly operations folks figuring out like, hey, I have to code if I want to keep my job, right? Like that was a big awakening for most folks in ops, that we couldn't just keep everything in wikis or whatever. Like we actually had to, version control our infrastructure. Well, the other thing that was an awakening, I think, was taking the monitoring and telemetry data and pushing it into the development team and kind of building this mesh over here for both folks. So let's see, did that play? Okay, great. Okay. So what are some security considerations for the operation stage? Doing chaos engineering, I think, is one of those things that people are starting to talk about. We'll see where that lands ultimately. looking at doing things like dealing with circuit breaker patterns. I really like Michael Nygaard's book. I think I have a link to that later. Application security, looking for abuse and misuse, doing bug bounties or red teaming as a service. And let's see, I think that was just a AppSec, joke. So I don't know. Oh yeah, and there's a separation both in. I kind of talked earlier, like there's a separation in what are we able to staff in terms of like the 110-to-1 ratio. Well, this is I actually work at like a replacement for old school WAF product, so I won't name the actual vendor here because it's not like, didn't mean it like that, but I didn't want to be perceived that way, and this is kind of, well, let me read it. Every aspect of managing WAFs is an ongoing process. This is the antithesis of set it and forget it technology. The real point of this research, to maximize value from your WAF, you need to go in with everyone's eyes open to the effort required to get and keep the WAF running productively. In the same paper, he goes on to say, like, you got to have like 2 to 3 headcount dedicated to this technology. And because, I've become a part of the WAF industry or complex or whatever, there's like a Forrester report. It's like, I think it was 16%, I don't know the actual number, but it was low, of people that actually liked using a WAF, right? So the worst piece of technology that security has, put in place in an organization, we're now also telling them, like, you got to dedicate lots of people to it. Like, it is just a separation from the mental model for most businesses that are trying to get things done, and it sort of breaks things up here. Instead, like, I think we need to look at how do we detect the things that matter, like account takeover attempts, parts of the site that are under attack, just being able to know like what is under attack, what's not. I have a thing that we published for Signal Sciences that's a white paper on that if you're interested. But it really boils down to putting in tooling that like helps get you from the left-hand side where you're just looking at logs and stuff to you're looking to security telemetry data in some sort of meaningful way that's not just kind of event logging type stuff. So options for this, like if you're looking for open source, you want to roll your own, you can do mod security plus elk, and you can gain some application insight in that way. Paid stuff, like of course I work at Signal Sciences, so we definitely have the best, right? But there's like Contrast and Previty and T-Cell, there's some other options for you out there as well. But the big thing is not, that I wouldn't say, yeah, go look at this company or that company, but I would say try to avoid the whole application security thing that we've done for many years and we're still doing, where we're taking application security defense and we're like layering it up in the CDN, right? We're like, well, this stuff kind of breaks things, so we're just gonna like get it off of our perimeter and like move it way out to the perimeter and make it real loose. Like that actually doesn't help many folks. Okay, and Shannon talked as well, and I like this as well, but using red teaming as a service, and she creates a culture where like, hey, once a week, like we're just gonna get together and we're gonna red team something. And I like some of Shannon's stories. She didn't share any of them this morning on this, but where people are begging to like get their apps like pen tested by them. They're like, oh yeah, we have this new thing, we're a little worried about it, can you test it out? And like, that changes the culture transaction that's going on. Yeah, bug bounties. I mean, you can roll your own, you can do them internally. There's paid ones like HackerOne, BugCrowd, Synac. Those are some ones to take a look at. And also taking logging and thinking about security telemetry through logging. So Elk is your open source version, but you can look at Splunk and Sumo Logic. A book that I like around some of this stuff that's not necessarily security related, but has a lot of operational discipline stuff, and that I think has a lot of impact to security, is Michael Nygaard's book, Release It. And let's see, I think I'm getting low on time here. So the question is asked here, do you know if you're under attack at this current moment? Or what are attackers going after? Can I turn off services independently if I'm being attacked? And am I doing any chaos experiments where I can inject a little bit of failure modes, specifically even in security type places? I think that's helpful. So here's some security's new core ideology that I would suggest us thinking through. So instead of being a culture of no, we embrace empathy. We have enablement of other people in the business. We try to be fast and non-blocking. I think that the chance for us to say no is not there. We have to say yes, but also do this, and provide avenues and ways for people to move forward. If you find yourself where you're slowing down delivery, like that should be a red flag for you. And join with any testing efforts. Like whenever you see people doing testing, add security testing inside of that. Those are key indicators of success. Whenever I see people that are doing well, like they do this list of stuff. Adding security automation in every phase, penetration testing alongside of the pipeline as a service. I mean, there's some stuff you don't want to block the build for while people are doing pen testing, but as things are coming out, like you're engaging with that as well. I think in the end, like you could sort of summarize all this as like make security provide value, but by just making security a normal thing. Like it's not this thing that happens, on an annual cycle. It's not this thing that happens off cycle, but it's a thing that we've put inside of the entire pipeline from idea and design all the way to the end. So what should we do next week? Next week, like identify the stages of your CI/CD pipeline. You may call them 4 stages, 5, 6, I don't know, but take those and start looking at some of these questions and saying, are these questions applied to like what we're doing? Are we doing things in each stage? My friend Charles Nwatu, who's over at Stitch Fix as a director of security over there, he said he's always really trying to help his team, and I think this is right, and it's similar to what Shannon said as well this morning. Like, we try to be perfect. We try to do everything. We try to make sure that we have complete coverage everywhere. And he always encourages folks, like, do less, better, right? Don't try to like solve all the problems, but like if you can add something to the linting, great. If you can add some testing in the build phase, great. If you're doing some testing for compliance, maybe not all of it, you're not running the whole CIS handbook script or whatever, but you're testing for some of that, great. Like, and taking places where you can add in that, like in each of those phases of the pipeline, looking for security, like that is a win. And it's going to be noticed throughout the entire organization. Small stuff, even like what I shared earlier with Aaron Reinhardt that he put inside of his pipeline, those little things add wins, and that is how security kind of overcomes this problem that we're faced. So if you send me an email, I can send you this, or if you have any other questions, I'll get that to you by this evening. So anyways, thanks everybody for your time, and I'll be hanging around if anybody has questions like in the back out there. All right, thanks.